Hey friends, I was recently sent some items to try from a small business called Hippie Crafter. Just a quick caveat here, I don't plan on doing a bunch of reviews on this channel. It's just not really what I want to do here, but this is the first time someone reached out to me for this kind of thing, so I obliged. I also want you to know that anytime I do decide to review anything, I absolutely refuse to BS you all about it. If there's something I don't like about it, I'ma tell you. So, that being said, let's look at what they sent me. Like I mentioned, Hippie Crafter is a small business out of Florida here in the US. The products themselves are sourced from China, which I don't have a problem with personally, but it would have been extra bonus points if they were US made. They sent me a set of 25 watercolor brush pens, a large set of 72 watercolor pencils, and a 9x12 set of watercolor paper, which they sell as a 2-pack. This is a lot of stuff. I was really excited to get it all out and try it. I'm going to show you my experience with all the things and do a little comparison, and at the end I'm going to price compare the difference between Hippie Crafter, one or two other budget-friendly brands, and also the more expensive brands. First thing I tried was the watercolor brush pens because I've never used these before from any brand. I want to preemptively say here that my experience with the Hippie Crafter watercolor supplies does redeem itself after this initial brush pen experience. But the first thing I did when I got these was get the pens out and the paper they sent me and start swatching all the colors. I drew my little swatch of color and then went in with the water to see how the color blends out and changes when activated. And this is where my heart sank because it was not good. And that makes me really sad because if any company bothers to send me free stuff, I'm very appreciative of that and I want to say all the good things. But if something isn't good, I have to say so, and I feel really bad doing it. And unfortunately, in the case of the brush pens on this paper, it was not a good pairing. It was like the paper sucked up most of the pigment and then held onto it for dear life. Some colors would blend out a little, but most of them just didn't move. You ever draw on paper with just regular markers, like maybe some basic Crayola markers or something, and then the paper gets wet? That's what this looked like. The color just bled, it didn't move. In some cases, it made the colors and the pigment separate, which isn't always a bad thing, but for the most part, you don't want that. I was so sad. I wanted to play with these so bad, and look, I don't have any prior experience with watercolor brush pens, so maybe I'm missing something here. I did look up videos of other people demoing with other brands of brush pens, and this was not at all what happened for them, so I don't know. But I do know that with watercolor, paper really is everything. It's way more important than the paint. So I busted out my good Bao paper to see if I had the same experience. It was also a great reason to use the hot press paper, which I don't normally care for, so my little pad has been neglected. But because hot press paper is really smooth and not textured, I thought it'd be perfect for something like watercolor markers, and I was correct. You can see here, I just kind of played around and swatched and got a much better result. The pigment blended out much easier on this paper. I could get some nice effects making blooms with watercolor droplets. I made a fun little tree, and I drew some little mushroom caps to play with the layering. Much better experience, and that was a relief. They do feel dry when you're working kind of fast. You kind of have to work the brush to get it flowing a bit. When you slow down, you get a much better result. I've seen this kind of complaint from a lot of different watercolor brush markers like this when I've looked at reviews on Amazon, so for other more budget-friendly products like this, that seems to be a common complaint across the board, not just with these. I do love how fine a line I could get with the brush tip. And one thing that seemed different about these is the fine tip end. On others, they seem to usually be like a bullet tip marker, but on these, they're a really fine plastic nib. And that I really like. I like me a plastic nib. Even if I don't use these for watercolor, I'll probably use them in my bullet journal at least. I taped off a sheet of the hot press paper and did a very quick little landscape experiment with them. Like I said, I've never used watercolor brush pens before, and I will be the first to tell you I really don't know what I'm doing. They seem to me to be very suited for very illustrative type of work, lots of fun line work on top of some soft washes, stuff like that. So I kind of tried to do that here, but obviously a lot more experimenting is needed on my behalf. I'm really looking forward to that though. I'd love to really get the hang of these and show what I've learned in a future video. They aren't super pigmented markers. When I watched people use the expensive brands like Faber-Castell and Winsor & Newton, those were incredibly pigmented, especially the Winsor & Newton markers. Ooh, those looked really nice. But those also come with the price tag you'd expect for something like that. So, like I said, I'll show you the price comparison at the end of this. Here's my little practice landscape. It's not a masterpiece, but I had fun. Let's get into the pencils, because when I opened these, I got so excited. This is a set of 72, and there are so many colors. I was pumped to get these. They also come in a nice tin, which is cool, and I do have more expensive, more professional type brand on hand to compare these two for you, so I'll get into that in a minute. My experience with watercolor pencils is not extensive, but I do own some and have used them a bit. I went back to the Hippie Crafter paper when I swatched these and was so relieved to have a way better experience than with the markers here. They all swatched out pretty well. None of the tips of the pencils broke either, despite me using a fair amount of pressure, which is notable, I think. These also have color names on all of them, which I like. The markers didn't. Not a huge deal, but worth noting. There is one color here I thought they might want to consider renaming. Not just because it's a little silly to only name the white skin tone's flesh. There's another reason. And if you know, you know. And if you don't know, maybe give it a Google. I LOL'd. So the other watercolor pencils I have are Derwent brand, which is generally thought of as a more professional grade of pencil and are a little pricier. I did a side-by-side swatch of them next to Hippie Crafter to see the differences. I started with the black pencil, and there were pros and cons to both of these. The Derwent pencil did feel a little more buttery against the paper, a little more creamy. It was subtle but noticeable. I tried to make sure the swatches were the same size and that the pencil was applied just as thick on both, too. I wetted the Hippie Crafter pencil first, and it is decently pigmented, and the black is pretty neutral. Maybe a tad red, but it doesn't pull super blue or green, which is pretty common with most black colors, so that would be a big bonus for a lot of folks. The Derwent was noticeably more pigmented. I got a lot more paint from that swatch. Gotta be honest, it was nice. It was, however, a very blue-black, which I'm sure you can see in the swatch here. This is just the black my particular set came with. It's called Ivory Black. Derwent is one of those brands where you can buy individual colors if you want. They have tons of them, and I'm sure they have more than one black, so they likely do have one that's more neutral, just not the one that came in my set. I also did a few other comparison swatches with colors that were closest together between the two sets, so you can see those here. I can feel the difference when painting, but the differences in the end result itself is kind of minimal. I did the same quick landscape study with both sets, again on the Baohong hot press paper, because that smooth surface, I think, is so nice with a product like this as well as the markers. I did the Hippie Crafter brand on the left here, and having so many colors in a set like this is so nice. It was really hard not to use every color. I tried really hard not to. Like I said, I have some experience with watercolor pencils, but definitely not enough to feel like I really know what I'm doing, so there's a big learning curve for me here. But like the markers, I think these are great for more illustrative work. The pencil lines often show through the washes, which some might not like, but I think it gives it a pretty distinctive feel, and it was a characteristic for both brands. On the Derwent side, my palette was a lot more limited because I only have a set of 12, because these are pricier pencils. I did intentionally limit my time on these to about 20 minutes or so a piece, but you know what? Looking at these side by side, I personally can't tell, oh, this side's definitely the expensive pencil side or anything like that. I think the end result's very comparable. Okay, let's get into the Hippie Crafter paper they sent. They have two sizes of watercolor paper on their site, the 9x12, which is what this is, and an 11x15 option. Both of them only come in a pack of 2. You can't buy them individually, which is kind of weird. I'm not sure why that's the case. But you get 60 sheets total with the 9x12, which is a lot of paper. With the 11x15 paper, you get a total of 30 sheets. It's 140-pound paper, so it is the nice, thick size you want your watercolor paper to be. It's in a pad, not a block, so you might want to pull individual pages out and tape them down if warping bugs you. To me, this paper is very comparable to the paper I use to make my thank you cards, which is also a very budget paper from B Paper Company, although I had a hard time finding the exact pad I have online. They've probably discontinued it. B still makes watercolor paper, but maybe not in the huge 50-sheet pad I've been using, so I didn't include that in the price comparison later. This isn't cotton paper like most student-grade budget-friendly brands like Canson. It's likely cellulose, which is fine. But once you've used cotton paper, you know there's a big difference in performance. But there's nothing wrong with cellulose paper. It gets the job done. I did bust out my good watercolors to try on this paper to see how it compares to my other paper. Since it feels so similar to the B brand I use for my cards, I painted one of those because I figured that'd be a good way to give me a good comparison, and it was very similar. This paper does have a slight texture to it when it's wet that's almost like it's pilling a little, even though it's not. It's really subtle. It seems to go away once it's dry. The biggest difference I noticed was that it was really hard to scratch back as the paint dried to get like little highlights and stuff. It actually ripped just a little bit when I tried to do that on a separate swatch. I also did a small test to see if excess water would make it really pill up, and surprisingly it didn't, which is great. I also did a small test to see how well colors would lift back out once it was dry, and that worked pretty decent too, so that's also good. I would say this paper is very similar to something like Canson, but if I'm being 100% honest, I think Canson is just a little bit better. Not a ton better, but a little bit better. It's been a while since I've used it, so I can't speak to that in super detail, but those are my thoughts. Canson does cost a tiny bit more though, like literally 1 cent more per sheet. Both budget papers are going to give you slightly more dull colors once the colors are dry than a nice cotton paper will. But I always prefer cheaper paper like this for general drawing and practice and stuff like that. Just working out your ideas before you try to put them down on the more expensive stuff, so it definitely has its place. With that said, let's get into the cost difference. I'm going to compare a few brands for each of these and also break down exact cost per item because I think that also matters. Hippie Crafter sells from their own website and also has an Amazon storefront, and the price is a little different across the two, so I included both. It's a little bit more on their own site, but also not everyone wants to give Bezos any more money, and I don't blame you for that. So The prices for all the comparison brands are from Amazon. It's just way more simplified for me to do it that way. For the markers, Hippie Crafter is a set of 25 markers for $21.99 on their website. This comes out to 88 cents per marker. On Amazon, it's $19.99, which is 80 cents per marker. They also sell a set of 50, which on Amazon is $27.99. This makes each marker only 56 cents each, which is pretty awesome. They have that big set on their own website too, but I forgot to write it down. It's $33.99, which is 68 cents per marker. Compare this to Winsor & Newton's brush pens, which has a set of 24 for a whopping $103.49. This is $4.31 per pen. They also have a set of 12 for $32.99, which makes each pen $2.75. Amazon's pricing is so weird. It fluctuates a lot, and I don't think sellers always have complete control over it from what I've read. So that might explain some of the weirdness. I don't know. Also, all of these prices are what they were at the time that I made this video, so if you go later on down the road and go look them up, they might have changed a little bit. But at the moment, these were all the prices. Faber-Castell has watercolor markers and watercolor brush pens. Their set of 10 watercolor markers are $42.09, which is $4.21 per marker. Their brush pens come in a 12-pack and are $29.98, which is $2.50 per pen. And just to clarify, because I think I've called Hippie Crafters brush pens markers a couple times, just because they are brush pens technically, so just be aware of that. Arteza, which is another budget-friendly student-grade craft brand, has a 49-pack of watercolor brush pens, and theirs are $38.99, which is 81 cents per pen. Very comparable to Hippie Crafter, but still a little bit more, especially when we're comparing the larger set. Watercolor pencils. Hippie Crafters is a set of 72, and on their own website is $29.99. That's 42 cents per pencil. On Amazon, the set is $25.99, which is 36 cents per pencil. Compared to Arteza, which also has a 72 pencil set, theirs is $33.44. That's 45 cents per pencil. Derwent has a set of 72 watercolor pencils. Theirs is $99.95, which is $1.39 per pencil. And I don't know why I didn't write it down, but the 12-pack, which is what I have, is $20, which is $1.67 per pencil. Winsor & Newton has a 50-pack for $63.23, which is $1.26 per pencil. This one was interesting. Faber-Castell has a 144-pack for $156.56, which is $1.09 per pencil, and a 24-pack, strangely, for $8.19, which is only 34 cents per pencil, and the cheapest. I don't know if that's always the price for that set. I thought that was kind of weird, but cool. And finally, paper. All papers I compare are 140-pound paper. Hippie Crafter's 9x12 pack of 2 is $25.99 on their website. This is 43 cents per sheet, and $23.99 on Amazon, which is 40 cents per sheet. Canson XL's 9x12 paper is 30 sheets and $12.20, which is 41 cents per sheet. Bao Academy is 100% cotton paper. Theirs are in metric, so the closest size I've seen was 8.27 inches by 12.2 inches. And it's a block of paper, not a pad, and it's 20 sheets for $20.61, which is $1.03 per sheet. And finally, Arches paper, also 100% cotton, is a 9x12 block of 12 sheets for $19.70, which is $1.64 per sheet. Whew, we did it. That was a lot to go over. Holy crap. So my final thoughts on these is if you want to try watercolor brush pens or pencils, but you don't have a lot of money to spend on them, or maybe you want a gift for someone who's showing an interest in art, but they're still a beginner, this is a pretty good option. Especially the pencils. I really love those. I'm going to be playing with those a lot. They are student-grade materials. I know they say professional on all the packaging, but they're not. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know why companies insist on doing this sometimes instead of just embracing what they are. Because student-grade materials are necessary and useful at any skill level. Even professional artists have a use for them. I will also reiterate, I do not think the watercolor brush pens pair well with their paper, like at all. I know on their site they recommend them together. I would not do that if I were them. I think it's probably hurting them more than helping them. But I had a great time with them on better paper, so I don't think it was the brush pen's fault. Overall, these are fun products, and they sell a ton of other art supplies too, not just watercolor stuff. I'd check them out. Support a small business. There are links to everything in the description if you do want to check them out. And if you made it to the end, let me know what you think. Have you used any of these products before? Did you have a different experience, particularly the brush pens? Have you used other brands? If you think there's a trick to those that I'm missing, let me know in the comments. Extra thank you to Hippie Crafter again for sending me these products. They are really fun, and I'm definitely going to get some use out of them. I'm sure they'll make appearances in future videos. Thank you all so much for watching to the end. You are wonderful, and I hope you have a great day. I will see you again soon.